EV early adopters. We're at about 8% sort of market penetration here. Overall, that's still very much the early adopter stage. And early adopters, both in tech and in EVs, tend to be gendered more towards the male variety, um, which kind of counters overall car buying statistics, where women in the household typically make up the decision makers in the household. So, um, I want to talk about why there's a disconnect. So we have Amelia, who is the Motorhead Mama. I don't know how I'm going to refer to her to the rest of the show. It might be back and forth, but she is a woman. She is an automotive expert. Amelia, how long have you been doing this?
Like 12 years, something like that.
So I consider that expertise. She owns a Model Y. She lives in Los Angeles, so she is the Southern California blonde Valley Girl EV owner.
Oh, whoa, whoa, whoa. Watch
Oh
it,
no,
Valley Girl.
sorry, no, not Valley Girl. But
Woo!
what I will say is she lives down the road from Jason Momoa,
Yeah.
so she sees him on the regular, and Jason Momoa has goats.
A donkey.
Donkeys. I'm sorry, donkeys. I keep thinking goats. He has a donkey named after her daughter.
Yeah.
So
So we're
that's
obviously like this.
that's your fun fact for the moment. So Amelia, Mama, what's up with EVs? Why? What? Let's talk about your EV ownership first. You have a Model Y. What did you? Why would you walk? What was your process in going through that? And then sort of what has your ownership experience been like with it?
I mean, listen, I have been wanting to get an EV for a long time, mainly because, we all know it was going in that direction. And my husband always said, I'll get an EV over my dead body. Well, we knew that wasn't going to happen. But I also am a person with a lot of cars in my driveway because I am a true enthusiast and I am a collector of vehicles. So when, you got 5 cars in the driveway and only 4 3/4 of them run, you kind of need something reliable. And the beauty of an EV is they are really reliable. Like if you can keep that thing charged, right? We all know this. You guys watch the show or fans, you only have to deal with brakes and tires, right? Essentially with an EV. And all my other cars are more complicated. So we got the Model Y and we got it because it was such a screaming deal. And my husband's best friend had one. And you know how that goes, right? Like just thought it was the greatest. And I was like, but honey, like I have a experience with other EVs, maybe we should consider. And, Elon does some bad things. No, no, no. And it's marriage, so you compromise. So now we have the Model Y. I do drive it a lot. There are some things I really like about it. And there are a lot of things I hate about it, but that's not what this show is going to be about. And it's been very, very interesting being able to experience this vehicle in the context of being able to compare it to other cars that I test drive, or just in the context of people looking to me for EV buying advice.
Well,
Yeah.
I think that I think I want to talk a little bit about that context, just because there is, in the realm of automotive journalism, a lot of quote unquote mainstream automotive journalists don't have access to Tesla. Tesla doesn't necessarily have a forward facing PR department. That's not entirely true because with the Cybertruck launch that just happened,
Yeah.
clearly there were people that reached out to some media outlets to arrange coverage. So there is PR that happens. But a lot of, especially let's say the old white guys, have a mindset of if the vehicle is not provided to me from the manufacturer to evaluate, then I don't necessarily care about it. And I think that if you're going to talk about EVs, you have to have the context of the Tesla experience, whether you own one, whether you Turo one
Yep.
occasionally,
Yep.
something. You have to be able to do that because that Teslas are the largest market share of EVs by a lot, by a
A lot.
significant number. And regardless of how you feel about Elon's politics or anything like that, these cars sell. They're the EVs that sell. They do some things very, very well.
Yep.
And if you ignore that or don't pay attention to that, then you are doing a disservice to your audience when you are trying to say, oh, well, the Genesis electrified GV70 is the best luxury crossover under $100,000. Well, if you've never driven a Model Y, which is a premium midsize
Exactly.
crossover, like, can you make that statement? Now, I would make that statement, but you can't do that unless you've driven it and had that experience. So I think having that Model Y in your driveway and talking about EVs does give you a leg up on that context, especially in some things that we're going to talk about in a little bit. So
Yeah. I,
go
I
ahead. I'm
couldn't
sorry.
agree more.
Yeah. So so you have Model Y, you've lived with it. There's some things you like, there's some things you don't like. How often? I mean, I'm assuming you have a charger at home.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Tesla charger.
you have
Yeah.
a Tesla charger at home. How often do you take it on road trips? How often do you find yourself at like a supercharger?
Extremely rarely. I haven't really, we're more road trip in the snow kind of people. And so that we just got the vehicle in the spring. So we haven't, one of the reasons why we got a Tesla is we go snowboarding. And when we do that, there are superchargers on the way to the place we snowboard. But when I needed to get to a supercharger the other day, I went to one that was very close to my house and the supercharger was down.
Oh, okay.
And,
All of
and
them?
all of them were down, and there were 3 cars in the process of being towed away.
Oh no.
So I don't know what happened. I didn't get the deets, but it was fascinating.
Yeah, that's something.
Yeah.
Because cars are being towed away because they probably got there with very little range, and then the chargers didn't work. And charger, that's a little rare for Tesla. I mean, typically if there is I've never seen a whole station down. Like, I've
Me
seen
neither.
individual stalls. I mean,
Yep.
that's a somewhat common occurrence. And Tesla owners will typically leave the charger unplugged. So if you
Yes.
pull up to a supercharger and the thing's not reholstered,
Yeah.
you can be reasonably certain that one doesn't work. So there's a little bit of etiquette there. But yeah, that's interesting. I mean, we know charging obviously needs to get better, but it's surprising to see a Tesla failure like that.
It
So
was shocking. And this was Calabasas where,
shocking.
it was shocking. It was shocking. Disturbing to me. But I mean, you come here often. In
I
LA,
do,
it's
unfortunately. I mean, no, fortunately.
hey, 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 hey.
Hey,
I love LA. I'll defend it forever. In this town, Tesla is just such a mainstay. I mean, having a Model Y, and I keep wanting to write about this. There, you can find a Model Y in every color in the rainbow in Los Angeles, and the reason for that is because if you have a gray one with a white interior, like I do, you'll never find it in a parking lot because it's just one of the 20 other ones
right.
that are gray with white interior. It's extraordinary. Like it's unbelievable.
Well, and white, when white was the free color, I mean, everybody was buying white. But wraps, I mean, wraps are extremely common. Tesla now sells wraps straight through their website. But you can usually find them cheaper going through another shop, a reliable shop that can do that. Um, all right, so we've established you sort of know what's going on. Thank goodness. A little bit. And let's dive right into, I think, women buying EVs. We'll cover some less serious stuff here as we sort of go along, but I really want to hit sort of what we teased in both the thumbnail and the title, which is safety. So
Yeah.
so Amelia, what do you think is, this is a leading question, Your Honor. Why do you think women are more apprehensive about buying an EV than a man is? And I don't mean, like, not in terms of early adoption, but like what, like we talk about range anxiety, we talk about charging network, we talk about the ability to charge at home, we talk about range, we talk
Yep.
about a lot of these things. But why, when we were planning for this show, you made a really good point about range is different when, potentially when
Yep.
you're a woman. Why is that a concern? And let's go sort of into that.
Okay. So as a woman, whether you're a young woman or you're a mother with small kids, or you're a mom who does a lot of running around because you have teenagers, or you're an older woman, safety is always kind of top of mind when you're on the road, whether you're thinking about crash or where you need to pull over or where you might get stranded. Um, and getting stranded alone has its ramifications. Getting stranded with children has ramifications. And so range anxiety for women isn't just about, oh, I might, run out of juice and get stuck somewhere. If you're stuck somewhere with, 3 kids and a baby, or you're stuck somewhere and it's dark and you're alone and you just happen to be wearing, I don't know, workout pants or whatever it is, you feel vulnerable. And that is something that I don't think people talk about enough. I mean, when I was test driving the e-Golf in the early days of the e-Golf, and man, I loved that little car so much. I, I know this might be shocking to you, Chad, but I had a hard time finding a charging station that worked.
Oh, really?
I know, it's totally weird. And I was in City of Industry or something. I was going to a Karma vehicle launch out there, actually. And the only charging station I could find was at a government building, because that's how it works in California, right? The only
Sure.
reliable one is like at the mayor's office. Could be a little bit of corruption, but whatever. So I get to this place and it's dark and it's a government building, so nobody's there. And this is like a very, I'm surrounded by warehouses. I'm by myself and I'm going, so I've got to sit here for, an hour and 15 minutes while this bad boy charges. I was completely freaked out. I was terrified. And I thought, this isn't efficient at all. If I had to, put some gas in this car, I'd be in and out in 10 minutes. Right.
Right.
So this is something that I think about a lot. I think women with young kids think about this a lot. And I don't think that the industry has done a very good job at addressing. And certainly in their marketing campaigns, nobody really addresses this. And they all want to tell us, oh, we have a button here where you can call the cops. Well, that helps me if there's a gun to my head, but that doesn't necessarily help me if I feel.
Well, it doesn't necessarily help you if there's a gun to your head, though, either.
True.
I mean, it does help you if you are alongside the road and you're away from the charger. But yeah, this is something that hasn't been talked about a super ton. My friend Kristen Lee, who I believe she's at the Drive now, was at the Drive, but she was a Business Insider when she wrote this story, which we're gonna pull up here in a second. That addresses this sort of question or concern about
Exactly.
Charging. And also, like, when we did our EV sort of charging test curve of the e-transit, we used the Electrify America station in Ypsilanti, and that particular one is in what used to be a Walmart parking lot, but now it's like an Ollie's, like, super discount Chinese knockoff place, and like a Harbor Freight, and after dark it's super sketch. And that's one of the only 350 kilowatt the only one of the 350 kilowatt chargers that are even anywhere in there in the area. So I mean, I don't necessarily feel concerned when I pull up in a Bolts or a something like that, but the if I pulled up at a Taycan, I'd be a little concerned.
Right.
Yeah,
Yes.
but
100%.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm not a, but I'm not a woman either. So like, there's the Ypsilanti EA station. There is the Tesla superchargers in right when you cross into Indiana on the Indiana toll road from Ohio. It's like in the middle of a field, sort of up, like, and you're just surrounded by corn in all ways, and there's no lighting, and there's just nothing. It's not necessarily, I mean, I don't know if it's any safer or not, but you feel very exposed.
You feel
Wh-
very exposed, and sometimes it's in a parking garage, right? I mean,
Yep.
this is what gets me is when it's in a parking garage and it's some random charging network that I haven't downloaded the app for yet, but I'm in a parking garage underground and they're like, "Please download our app." I was like, "Fantastic. I'll walk up 5 flights of stairs and do that right away in the dark."
Right. Yeah. One tip is, at least like with ChargePoint, level 2 chargers,
Yeah.
what I'll say with them is a lot of them will say they won't have a credit card reader on them,
Yes, but you can
but
sometimes just
but if you could still sometimes tap to pay with your credit card, like,
exactly.
which they don't tell you that you can do it. They're like, please have your ChargePoint app. Well, I've
Yeah,
walked up to one before with a card and tapped to pay it, and had it
yeah,
work.
I've done that too.
Yeah. And eh, it's a concern. And I think that, you know, is that it, you talk about, Alan in the chat, also like to see overhead cover. That's another, that's
Right.
not as much as of a direct safety concern, but nobody likes charging in the winter, or like charging through the snow to plug in the charger, or charging in the rain, or things like that. We recently did a trip that the video drops on Monday, where we stopped at some Electrify Canada stations that did have a nice overhead canopy to cover and stuff like that, and it was great. It was just still in a Walmart parking lot.
Was it
But
solar?
I'm sorry.
Were there solar panels on it?
No, we were in a, it was too small of
Okay.
an area for that. Um, yeah, and I mean, like, they can't be in Walmart parking lots in the dark. Um, here's some interesting information that, maybe I don't know. Is that Tesla tends to, so ChargePoint, the whoever a ChargePoint install is typically owned by the station, or not by the station, but by the landowner.
Right,
So
okay.
if you're a gas station and you have ChargePoint chargers, you went and charged them. Um, there is, with Electrify America and with EV Go, those companies lease the land, and Tesla as well, lease the land from the property owner,
That makes sense.
and then so they still own the hardware. The lease agreement typically means that the property owner has to do like snow removal, or things like that, snow
Lighting,
removal,
stuff like that.
throwing trash away, stuff like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
but the hardware is still owned by, the EA or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, Tesla, whether they're paying more or they just have better weight because of the brand recognition,
Mhm.
tend to get in nicer places. They're not always in the nicest places, but typically, I've seen Tesla supercharger installs in places that aren't Walmart parking lots or Meijer parking lots. Yes, I've seen them exist there, but I've
Agreed.
also seen them in places that are a little less of a concern, maybe a little bit better lit, things like that. Where Electrify America, I
No,
mean, I don't mean they're not.
the
They're
back
in
of a
lower
crappy
quality,
mall.
yeah, they're in low quality places on the
Yeah.
property, because the grocery store chain or whatever wants to make this little bit of money, but they don't want to deal with it, so they shove you and push you off to the side.
I mean, the
And
joke to the Tesla charging station for a long time was that it was like the best networking spot in Southern California, right?
oh,
Because it would
yeah,
be in this great place and it would be a bunch of like Tesla bros with their Model Ys and they'd all be like tech guys or entertainment guys. And it was a lot of guys and they're all talking and they're all broing each other, broing it out. But you're right, it was in really nice locations. And usually it was a place that you could sort of see from the freeway or from a big um, thoroughfare.
right.
So they weren't sequestered to, the bad part of town or a bad parking spot. It's kind of interesting. I hadn't really thought about that, but it's true.
Yeah. So I mean, and we've been seeing design concepts and stuff for gas station replacement type of things with pull through stations. So if you're
Yep.
charging and towing a trailer, you can, that they're well lit, they're protected with canopy, stuff like that. Um so I mean, just because I want to reiterate this point, like, you have talked to people, you believe that
Mhm.
that is a significant, I don't say pain point, but yeah, I'll say significant pain point for considering an EV that maybe should be higher up on the priority list when an automaker is saying, okay, well, why isn't this particular segment of people, or why isn't this group, what are their concerns, what are they running into?
Yeah.
um and this is from the people that you've talked to in your own
Yeah.
experience, like, really kind of a BFD, and
It is a BFD.
it doesn't seem to be as addressed.
No, I think it follows under the umbrella of range anxiety, and it's just sort of been put there without
Mhm.
exploring the further ramifications of that. No one's really unpacked the different, Kristen's obvious her article did, which is brilliant, but like it isn't as simple. Range anxiety is much more complex for women than it is for men.
Mhm.
And maybe there are other demographics that are that true, like maybe like a trans person would feel that way too, like
Oh,
I don't
sure,
want to be
yeah, no,
yeah,
and no, and I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, that you're speaking for all women or anything like
right,
that either.
right,
um but I when I feel sketch at a charging station, I feel sketch because of the car that I'm in. Like, if I'm in something kind of fancy, but then it's like, oh, well, do I want to leave it? Like, do I want to lock it and leave it in this uncovered black darkness while I walk across the street to a gas station or something to get something to drink, or use the restroom?
oh, that's so
um
interesting.
is my Taycan still going to be there when I get back? Like, I mean, not my Taycan, Calvin, Porsche's Taycan, but
Right, of
um,
course.
but like, is that still going to be there, or should I stay with the car? Does
It's so
staying with the
interesting.
car put me at a higher risk than leaving the car? Like, it just because there isn't that much, protection and stuff around there.
Yeah.
Um, Alan also said that Jill at Pickup Truck Plus SUV Talk, hi Jill, um, has,
Jill and I have talked about this. I've talked
yeah,
to Jill
and
about this.
it's
Yeah.
there's a lot of issues with public charging, but one thing that I do want to point out, is this comment here, regarding range, and we're
Yeah.
going to talk about range anxiety and that. But one thing that I'll mention before we talk about range as a result of, kind of safety, is
Mhm.
that 80% right now of EV buyers charge exclusively at home. Um,
Yes.
does charging need to be better for people that live in apartments and non-housing house kind of things? Yes, absolutely. I'm not going to say that they don't. What I will say, though, that's only about typically about 30% of
Yeah.
the U.S. car driving population. So since we can't fix everything at once, let's go after the lowest hanging fruit. So let's target right now the homeowners
Yeah.
and solve those problems. And
Yeah.
then if you do live in an apartment right now, maybe an EV isn't right for you. And I think that that's okay to say, because I don't think an EV needs to be the perfect car for everybody for all things at the same time. I mean, Alan in our audience here, he's a real good regular of ours. He has a Miata that he tracks, like a track Miata. I mean, Miata is always the answer, but
It
but
is.
sometimes it's not always the answer. So in this case, an EV isn't necessarily always the answer either. One other thing I'll say about this comment about the lyric, I was just driving the Blazer yesterday. I asked about lyric deliveries and because Blazer deliveries, because they're both on the same thing.
Yeah.
They're working on it. I can't give you a timeline. I can't, because I'm not GM, but they're aware that their rollout has been slower than they
I
initially
would like to come
expected.
back to the idea of the lyric and the Blazer in the context of GM and women after we talk about range anxiety, because
Okay.
I think that's worth talking about.
Um, this is an I've seen other people talk about Alan's comment that I just put up here, which is it possible, like, should you be able to drive away when your EV is plugged in and charging? And as far as I know, there is no EV right now that can do that. If you're DC fast charging, you start the car, you put it in the drive, it won't go in the drive. You are
Right.
not going anywhere. And I would imagine that because 500 amps of level of three-phase power jolting through the car, probably not super smart to just disconnect that. It's not like a MagSafe charger on a phone, which actually that'd be kind of cool if it was. And I've seen a company that does level 2 MagSafe kind of connectors,
Well,
which is actually pretty cool, but nothing in the fast charger land. I would think that if I was in the car and I felt threatened, yes, I'd like to be able to pull away very quickly
yeah.
without having to get out and disconnect my car.
Yeah, it'd be
But
great if there was like a James Bond eject button.
yeah, yeah. But
It's a
I
good
don't
question.
know if yeah, it locks as well on level
Yeah, I'm
2.
sure. I'm sure.
Um, it would be nice to. I mean, I guess you're not really pulling away from a gas station either. I mean, you could,
You could.
but
It's not the best.
at what point does the gas station go boom? It's probably a little less likely than on an EV because something would still have to spark the fuel. And if you pulled away and somebody inside hit the emergency cutoff, you wouldn't necessarily have fuel everywhere. But I
But the
don't
bottom
know.
line is you're there for longer.
Yeah, you're there
You're
for longer,
there
which is
for
which is what
longer.
makes it a bigger concern because I've never really heard anybody talk about, oh well, if you feel threatened at a gas station and you're pumping gas,
Right.
climb in the car and speed away. You're not
Right.
even supposed to be sitting in the car while you're pumping
No.
gas.
No.
Um, so I don't know. I don't know if this is a solution. Maybe it's bulletproof windows in a Cybertruck, though.
There you go. Just get a
That's
Cybertruck.
just get a Cybertruck. It solves all of your problems.
The kids will love
Um,
it.
I think this is an interesting discussion, Alan. I think that we don't necessarily need to have it only because the solution, I believe, is well lit gas station. Like gas station kind of says it, well lit, canopied. There's a service, like there's a snack store or something inside, or bathrooms. Like there's something where there's like an attendant and cameras. I mean, a lot of these chargers don't even have cameras now. Like
Yeah.
attendants, cameras, like something that maybe is patrolled as much as a gas station is. Like that seems to be more of a solution than trying to solve it this way, because high
And
voltage is,
education.
yeah, I'm in
And
education.
with
but
everything.
but the reason why we want to talk about in terms of range and EVs is we'll sit here and tell you on this channel that you don't necessarily need 300 miles of range. Because I would much rather have a faster charging car than
Yep.
more range, which is why I like the EGMP cars, because I get 10 to 80% in 18 minutes. But I can see this argument that more range just means that I don't have to stop. And it's not because you don't want to stop or don't need to stop, but because you have concerns of the charging situation when you do stop.
I don't have to think about it. Like that's the real thing. I mean, I it's very rare that I found in my Model Y that I'm like, oh, I don't have the range, but that's because I come home and plug it in. If my daughter's driven it and forgot to plug it in, that's a whole other thing. But that's why I believe the Gravity will do so well, right? Because the range they say will be 440. It's a high-end SUV, perfect for the west side of LA, right? This is the world that I live in. And it's for that, sort of upscale mom that she runs a lot of errands. She picks up a lot of kids. She does a lot of carpool. I mean, the amount of miles that the average LA parent puts on their car per year is insane, right? And one night I had my daughter was out and I hadn't plugged in the Tesla and I looked at and I was like, whoa, I can't, if something happens to her right now and I have to go get her, I don't know that I have the range in the car, right? Because it doesn't start charging till 11 o'clock at night because that's the cheaper time to
Oh yeah, the off-peak shift. Yep.
Right. And I'm cheap. So just not having to think about it. It's one less thing to worry about. this is a big thing for women, particularly mothers, right? Because we're all like working and our kids are overscheduled and all these things are going on. And if you have a new thing to worry about, it's sort of like, oh, I'll save
Right.
the planet later, you know?
Sure. I mean, how many times have you, I mean, this is a little bit sidetracking, but how many times have you forgotten to charge the car? If you were to
I
guess.
would say 3 or 4 times, but my husband forgets to charge the car a lot, and it's, and my daughter
Oh,
too, right? Like, we all share this EV because we all have other cars that
okay.
never run. But yeah, so we're all kind of sharing this car, and so it's, not a matter of how often I forget. Collectively, we forget about 10% of the time.
Okay. That's a decent amount.
It
How
is.
often do you forget to plug your cell phone in?
Never. Good question.
See, you need to get that. You need to get that on the same wavelength.
Same rhythm.
Um, Wireless charging. This is not a sponsored video, but our EV Basics Education series is sponsored by a wireless charging company, and I've seen a couple of other wireless charging solutions out there.
I
Once
know they're
those,
out there.
once an OEM picks that up and decides to use it, I think that solves that problem, because you
Oh, yeah.
pull into your garage and you don't have to do anything. It just
Love it.
works.
Love it.
So you're not forgetting that. You're not tripping over a cord or cable stuff. There's a lot of commercial applications for it, but I think
Yeah.
that, I mean, I never forget to plug the car in, but I don't have multiple people driving the car either. And
Right.
I've been an absent-minded teenager before, so I can appreciate why Freya may forget to plug things in.
For sure.
But so you like the new Lucid.
I do.
You checked it out. There's a video in your YouTube channel, which we'll link to your first look at it, and we'll have some coverage of ours as well. What else? We covered sort of like the safety of the scariness of stuff that could be charging, and ways to kind of fix that. I mean, obviously, well lit cameras, weather protection, not in the middle of BFE. I mean, could help alleviate a lot of those concerns. I also think you're right. Education, especially education
Yeah.
with maybe how much range you need. So let's say you do have a 300-mile EV. Let's say you buy the new Blazer that I can't talk about yet.
Yeah.
The You might think, oh well, I drive 100. Maybe you only drive 100 miles a week, or 100 miles, every couple of days, or maybe even 100 miles a day.
Yeah.
But you think, oh well, on this off chance I might need to charge. You're anxious about that, so then you still think, oh, I don't want an EV. So I think education as well about how much you drive, how often you do charge at home, why it's better to charge at home.
But I think there's a whole other level to that, Chad. And you and I have touched on this. I remember you and I had a good talk about this at an auto show once.
Chicago, I think.
Was it Chicago?
I think it was.
Like, okay. And we were we were in the Nissan booth, and we were talking to Nissan about, just educating people. I'm going to make a gross generalization because I'm female. I'm not speaking for all women, but we know that tech early adopters are men. Statistically, that's shown. We know that in STEM, there aren't as many female engineers, there aren't as many female mathematicians. That's just kind of how it goes. And if I'm totally honest, yeah, I am a natural blonde. I'm very well educated and smarter than your dog. But when I first started driving
My dog's
EVs,
pretty dumb.
is it okay? My dog's a genius.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Smarter than him.
So smarter
So
than your dog.
exactly, I'm smarter than your border collie. So when I first started driving EVs, I was nervous charging, because you look at the plug and you look at the car, and I don't know if they match. And I'm like, what if I screw up this car? What if I plug this in? This is a terrible confession, but whatever. What if I plug this in and all of a sudden it just goes zzz, and then the Audi e-tron bursts into flames and it's my fault, right? It's sort of like if you haven't
I would walk away. I would just be like,
I don't know anything about it.
I'm done. That's it.
Motorhead who? Yeah, I mean,
what?
I'm just saying, like, there are basic things about EVs that maybe guys will geek out at, or
Right.
men will research more than women, whereas, and these are gross generalizations, but that I'm not going to spend the time learning about kilowatt hours because it just sounds boring.
No, but
Um,
episode 1 of our EV Basics series talks about the difference between kilowatts and kilowatt hours. It's explained very well by Craig Cole. Um,
this is
it's
why
it,
I
it's
love.
it's interesting. Yes, it's interesting you bring that up because I do completely agree with you that that it can be the first time you use it. Like, hey, am I doing this right? I think Tesla makes it pretty easy. Um,
Duh. You buy a
doesn't
Tesla, you go to a Tesla charger.
yeah.
Boom.
And as more automakers support NACS, I refuse to call it NACS. I know some people do, but I'm saying NACS.
That's clever.
Um, that should maybe help that a little bit. But yeah, charging connectors are different. Charging hardware is different everywhere you go. Like at least with the Tesla experience, it's the same looking hardware everywhere. It's the same. It's very consistent. And the differences
Instantaneous proof.
between hardware, even what Electrify America uses in the Midwest compared to what they use on the East Coast, like that can vary too. Um,
Yes.
so that can all be a little bit confusing there. And I don't see this problem of people being concerned about putting diesel in their gas car or driving a diesel and accidentally putting gas in. Now, I know people do. I see stories on the internet,
Of course, it's a
all of
thing.
the time
Yeah.
of do that, but there doesn't seem to be that level of fear of doing it wrong the way that charging an electric car is, which I find
I mean, I
a
think,
little bit weird because like around here, BP
well,
gas stations, just for
yeah,
completely anecdotal, around here, BP gas stations, the gasoline handle, the petrol handle is green and the
right,
diesel handle is black. If you go to the Shell station next door, the diesel handle is green and the petrol station is black.
right.
So they're reversed.
Every time I
So
get a diesel press, I've had a few diesel press cars, and every time I'm like, diesel, diesel, diesel. Like I check it 45 times. I don't want to be that person. But
um
I do think that the electrification, this is a terrible thing to say, but I think there have been guardrails around electrification as sort of a cultural thing for a long time.
mhm.
And it's almost like being a car guy. There was all this talk and everybody's like, hey, I'm into Rivian, man. And like, this is going to come out. And I think it was very intimidating for a lot of women. It wasn't approachable. And in that, it was sort of like the cars that came out were sedans or tiny little hatchbacks. And this is what brings me to the lyric and also obviously the gravity, that family friendly vehicles haven't always been EVs. A lot of that has to do obviously with battery size and range and stuff like that. But it was hard to be an early adopter as a mother when my only options were a tiny little Bolt or a Model S sedan.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
For
And
sure.
the best illustration of that is the Model X, right? Tesla's like, oh, all these guys are buying the Model S. It's a sedan. We need a SUV for their wives and their babies. Well, they come out with this car with this stupid wings, and that might be some teenage boy's fantasy, but that's no woman's fantasy. They don't think that's cool. They think that's embarrassing.
Right.
I had the Model X as a press car through a different program, and I drove
Yep.
up to Freya's school and I opened up the door. She said, Mom, shut it. It's so embarrassing. Oh my God. So, I think it's exciting for me as a woman who writes about cars and deals with a lot of female consumers that we have more family friendly EVs on the market now.
Right. Um, so yeah, obviously well, I mean, part of that's just the process of product development. The Bolt was sort of early on kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Then they decided to kill it. So, but they're bringing it back in 2025. So, whatever. Let's kind of go into a little bit of some of the feedback that we've got here. My friend David, longtime friend of David, do anybody know how many Raptors this Cybertruck can jump? We'll talk about that later. I'm saving this for the there's some learning curve. I think there's some learning curve with any new vehicle. I think it should be made as easy as possible. But a lot of time I was just talking about this with the infotainment. one of the infotainment guys in the Blazer program because they're running a new system that I can't talk about how to use it yet.
Oh.
But it's their new over-the-air update, non-Android Auto or CarPlay system.
Oh,
But
really?
yeah, but oh,
Oh,
it's fine. We'll talk about that later. But it's we as product experts, as reviewers, we spend a week with a car, sort of at best, and we don't necessarily have enough time to get used to something. So some things that are like super easy, yeah, we'll talk about those. We'll think that's great. But there are some things that a normal user, after you spend
yes.
2 or 3 weeks with it, it
Yep.
becomes sort of second nature. So
Exactly.
I think charging and stuff's that way too. I think again, education, our EV Basics series, what dealers do before delivery, all of that can be helpful, but could be better. So that when you do take that EV home for the first time,
Yeah.
you have had, some sort of experience with it before you get out there. Um, because yeah, and I mean, and speaking of confusing too, I mean, just getting a home charger installed can be pretty challenging. So, you know,
And the incentives can be challenging. I mean,
yeah, how do
that's the
yeah,
other thing that's really messy and is certainly challenging for me. And I'm sure you have, I know that all reviewers have this problem. Everybody's like, what's the best EV under 60 grand? I'm like, well, first tell me your household income, then tell me your filing status, then tell me your state, and let me see which model year you're talking
right.
about, because everything changes in 2024. So, it's such a moving target and so complex. That it's like you can be talking about two different cars before and after incentives, really based on
Yeah.
what their
And
tax bracket is.
Yep. And a lot of these chargers, some companies that sell chargers, a lot of these will tell you, oh, here, put in your state, and they'll kind of give you that information. But that's not necessarily available. So, like when you buy, and
That's
certainly like Qmerit do it. You don't necessarily have to go through Qmerit, but I know that's a
okay.
pretty big name in the area. We've got an interview coming up in a few weeks on the channel with a gentleman who runs a company called Emporia that sells value focused EV chargers, but come with automatic load balancing for your house. So if you do live in
Oh,
California, and a panel upgrade is $10,000, you probably don't want to spend that with all the
yeah.
permits and stuff like that. So like this hardware lets you install a high quality level 2 charger. Um, and then it just happens to not charge your car at full charge when you're also running your dryer or your microwave or things like that. So it looks
Interesting.
at overall electricity usage and then controls the charger based on what you're doing in the house. And
Which
right
is
it's the only solution out there that is code certified, like it's up to code, so like
right,
will pass an inspection. There
right,
are
right.
there are non approved ways of
Yeah,
doing that, but
yeah,
they won't pass a home inspection.
no, no.
um I did briefly mention wireless charging. None of it's commercially available yet because it's not no cars have it.
Right.
So the only car on the planet that I know of that comes with it from the factory is the Genesis GV60 in Korea. Um,
Mercedes doesn't have it in Europe?
I don't believe so. If they did, it's a very recent edition.
No.
Um, and we haven't tested one in-house testing, but
Right,
I've talked to engineers both at automakers as well as the charging company that makes the wireless chargers,
yeah,
and both have said that there's not any more significant charging losses than through a level 2 charger,
right.
the
Okay.
traditional corded level 2 charger. I know there's a lot of people out there that says, "Oh, you're going to lose all this. It's super inefficient." I just talked to, like I said, this week, an engineer at a particular automaker
Yeah,
driving a
yeah,
car,
let's guess.
and we talked about wireless charging, and he has tested it, and they are looking at on ways to make it work, but or potentially make it work. They're I don't want to say anything out of turn. They've just looked at it and they've researched it. And if it does become a thing, they want to obviously be a part of it.
I mean, don't you think we're sitting on the cusp? And I know you guys have talked about this, but we are sitting on the cusp of so much new technology, and everybody is focused on software, but hardware as well. Like, battery technology. There's such an arms race now between the automakers to try to get, to solid state or whatever it may be, whatever it is, as long as it's not liquid ion anymore. That will really change that could really change the game here for both men and women. I think it could be really exciting.
Right. Yeah. So moving on from that,
Yes.
um, education, and so we've talked about sort of the safety elements. We've talked about education. Um, what else? What else do both? I mean, what else do we need to be looking at, and what else do automakers need to be looking at? Is there any? I mean, obviously, this is less serious stuff than what we talked about before, but um, it's a lot more than just like, oh, where do I put a handbag, or where do I, or how
Yeah.
many or how many child seats can I fit in? Like, I mean, obviously the child seats and stuff's important, but are we are these cars still being just marketed to men? Do you see efforts of them being marketed to women? um I've seen some interesting stuff from Genesis recently. I don't know if it's necessarily women targeting, but it is minority targeting,
Yep.
um in I think very effective ways. And um like, what are we missing? What else are we missing? If you were me running an EV website
Mhm.
and maybe didn't have the budget to hire a woman right now,
Yeah.
like, what else would you be talking about?
I think your simple series is really your simple educational series is really great. I think one of the things I wanted to bring up is I've heard anecdotally, but through enough women that I think it's real. Actually, not just women, but also men in California, that when you get to the dealership, they try to talk you out of buying an EV.
Yes. Yes. No, that is not a excuse me, that is not a woman problem. That is a dealer problem.
Right. And that is because the inventory is smaller and the margins are smaller, right? So they're going to make less money. And also they haven't been educated. So
Right.
it really sort of says, the top 10 things you need to go before you go to the dealership to buy an
Mhm.
EV. And number one is they're going to try to talk you out of
Right.
it.
Well, it's not even because they don't think you know what you're talking about. It's just like it's much easier to flip a gas car, and
Exactly.
if you're a salesperson on commission. So as I've talked to, I would say at least four different automakers in the past 6 months, like
Yeah.
people of somewhat influence, and have had this exact discussion. Like, look,
Yeah.
you need to find a way to work with dealers to incentivize EV sales, whether that's having an EV expert,
Yeah.
a product expert on staff. Like, it can't just be the random person in there that has to work on a commission, because they aren't going to sell as many.
But you know what? The
They're
dealer
just stuck.
issue will never be solved, Chad. And that's
You
great
could, but
news.
you could do things like free floor plan EVs. You could
But you know
do.
what? It's great news for people like you and me because the
No, it
worse
is.
they are at their job, the more they need people like us. And
Oh,
frankly,
sure.
I'd much rather have them get their information from you who actually knows what he's talking about
Yeah.
and has no incentive for them to buy or not buy.
Right.
Right?
And we have plans in the works to work with some dealers to help education
Good.
sort of that way as well.
Yeah.
No, I don't want to put myself, I mean, I definitely don't want to put myself out of business, but there is a big communications breakdown
Yeah.
from going from watching me or Craig on your computer or on your phone to driving to that dealership and then being in that environment. And the Tesla solution isn't the answer. And I'll tell you why. Because while the Tesla store in Columbus is amazing, I went with a friend to look at a Model 3 in Cleveland, and it
Oh
was
my
horrible.
gosh.
One
Oh
of the
my God.
worst experiences ever.
My,
Because even though they're direct,
oh,
even though they're direct and maybe aren't on commission, they still have sales goals they have to hit. They still have to do all of the things that quote unquote dirty dealers do, um,
this
to
isn't an
move metal.
anti-Tesla show, but
Mhm.
however, I could
You
tell you
own one, so
my test drive was hideous. And the best was like the guy didn't know that what I do for a living. And I was like, why is there no bird's eye view? Oh, that's not available. Excuse me? Why is there no bird's eye view camera? Oh, well, those aren't out yet. What do you mean? What are you talking about? Like, and I would talk about the sensors and he would try to correct me. Like, it was a lot of mansplaining, which, of course
sure.
you expect when you go to a dealership. But I thought Tesla would be a little bit more evolved. Getting it serviced, woo, 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 woo. Did you see the picture I posted on? I don't know. I think you commented on it. I posted a picture on social media that was basically like to get my Tesla serviced for the AC that broke 2 months after I bought it. My appointment was in this random building somewhere in North Hollywood, where I walked in and it looked like an abandoned office building, and there was just like one guy and a coffee machine.
We had to get the front control arms replaced on the Model 3 we have, which is a very common problem.
Yes,
And
yes, I know about those.
and the place that we went to was like, wait, is this like, this isn't a dealership? It's not really a service center. Like, what is this?
Good as well.
And
And talk about safety, right? Like, I'm there in the middle of nowhere.
yeah, like, what building am I going to? Like, am I about to end up?
Am I
like,
getting human trafficked? Like,
yeah,
what the hell is
is this? Just don't sit on the black couch if there's one in there when you walk in.
I'm not worth very much on the black market, but I'm still something. And I just thought, like, what am I doing here? And I couldn't get a loaner, so I had to wait for Uber and East Jesus. It was bad, but
right.
yeah.
Well, I mean, let's also talk briefly about the dealership experience. The one thing that our commenter here, actually wish I knew his first name because he comments quite a bit, but our Passport Bros friend here is they want to know where they can get the fixed cars, where they need repairs, and that's where the dealership model really, like, people understand that, like, you go to the dealership to get that, that's how they deal with it. They kind of know where to go. A Tesla, like, not all Tesla, I mean, most Tesla stores are service centers, but sometimes there's service centers that are separate of Tesla stores. Like, it can get kind of confusing. And then obviously loaner car access is important. Now, every time that I've had to take a car in for service, a loaner has been not a problem. And I guess in New York they were doing Uber credits, which I think is stupid too.
That's what they did for me.
But I've been to dealers though also where they'll send you over to the Enterprise across the street. So
Yes.
so it's not always like, hey, dealers don't always have loaners either. But
it's such a missed opportunity to upsell. Like, how many times BMW gave me a nicer car, and then all of a sudden I was like, oh, I like this, right? Like, and same with Porsche. It's like, I never would have thought about anyway. Yeah, it's a thing.
Well, and then also too, another issue, I mean, is just the cost of insurance, right?
Insurance, good call.
I mean, people talk about how expensive like batteries are to replace, which they are, but you don't, as from the educational standpoint, you don't have to worry about that cost typically. Because if the battery fails on any new EV right now, or any new EV that's come out in the past 4 or 5 years, you still got 3 years left on a battery warranty, at least. So in 5 to 8 years from now, when EV battery replacement becomes a necessity, they'll be more affordable. The problem is if you need to replace that battery, and it's not covered under warranty, which the only way it would be covered not under warranty would be like an accident, something destructive that way, or I don't know, you light your car on fire. So and talking about certain EVs with lightweighting, like Cybertruck, like how body damage, how difficult is that going to fix or replace? People were talking about Rivian fender replacement, rear bed fender sort of replacements, because the pricing of brake lights and stuff, because radar sensors don't go through aluminum. Like there's all this lightweighting sort of help makes
and off-roading, right?
Yeah. Like, well, nobody off-roads. Let's be.
There are people that off-road, including my husband, and people have a capable off-road vehicle.
Your husband is 1 in a million. You can tell him. You can tell him that I said that.
Hey, I've been a king of the hammers many times, and there are a lot of people off-roading, and they love instant torque, and they're going to love EVs.
Yeah. Oh, off-roading EVs is great. As long as you're comfortable taking your $100,000 Brodozer off-road. I mean, I like Brodozers. Don't get me wrong.
I do too.
Yeah. It's yeah. I mean, people just want their cars to work, and if it doesn't, they want to be fixed without confusion. I think that's normal. I think that's just general. Like, unless you buy like
bottom line.
unless you buy like an Alfa Romeo, then I feel like you should
Just expect it not to.
yes,
Or if you
yeah,
buy an English car in general too, like
yeah,
you should just
anything,
know it's. I
yeah,
mean, a friend of mine, I gave her all the EV buying advice, and she went and got an E-Pace, and I love that car. But then when it broke down, she was like, "What?" And I was like, "Girl, please, seriously." Like,
yeah. Yeah, no, no, I love the Giulia, especially in the Quadrifoglio,
oh yeah,
and the problem is yeah, like if it didn't break down at any point, I would almost be disappointed, which I know is a horrible thing to say, but
it's
like
part of the experience.
it's part of the experience. So, but yes, generally, most of the time, yes, the car should work. And EVs tend to be a bit more reliable, but what they don't, like you need to be able to have them fixed, you need
Yeah.
to be able to do that. 4xe off-roading, yes. Yes, it's actually the great way to do it. Other than quite a few 4xe are being recalled right now because they might get you.
Don't get me started on the 4 by
Which is
E.
not say it, which is that. And there's some weird change ups at Jeep recently too. Morrison's out,
I know. What a bummer.
which
I know, but
I don't
everyone's
know.
saying it's a demotion, but is it? It's like performance parts for Jeep. That's gotta be.
It's a bit of a demotion.
Do we know the revenue of the performance part arm
No,
versus
but we know the Jeep sales have been terrible.
right? And
Yeah,
Broncos crushing it. I mean, just looking
yeah.
around
Well,
LA,
and the Wagoneer, Grand Wagoneer rollout, like
yeah.
not.
Read the room, fellas. Read the room.
I like Jim a lot. He's one of my favorite. He's one of my
I
favorite
love him. He's a
executives.
great guy.
He's authentic. He can speak to the people. He knows he can talk the talk, walk the walk.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think he inherited some of the problems. I don't
Of
think that it all
course.
falls on him.
Yeah.
But there are some issues, and ultimately crap rolls uphill at automakers. And I think he was the one to, you know.
But
So I don't
his
know. I don't think the guy that heads
arm
Alfa Romeo can
But
sell
his arm
Jeeps, but
also carried Stellantis. I mean, anybody is going to throw stones at Jeep. It's like the rest of those brands wouldn't exist without Jeep sales.
right.
Who are we kidding? Come on now.
I don't know. I mean, I view it as a demotion. I've talked to some people that also feel that this was a bit of a punishment for current Jeep sort of stuff. I don't know how I don't know how the head of Alfa Romeo can now turn around and sell Jeeps. I hope he can. I mean,
We'll see.
but it'll be interesting to see what happens. And 4xe has been a bit of a kerfuffle.
Bummer.
Not entirely because of Jim's doing either.
No, of course not.
But certain states with emissions, like the ZEV states that could do certain things, the consortium that was built around ZEV states, and then Stellantis, because it was still FCA, didn't want in. But then when Stellantis took over, they did want in, but the consortium didn't let them in. So that's why ZEV states carried stocked 4xe, and non-ZEV states weren't stocking 4xe. You could still order them, but like it became this real massive confusing mess. I will say the Jaguar I-Pace is not the way to go unless they fix the reliability. It's
100%.
a fun car, but
It's a fun car.
for an electric car, it's very unreliable.
It's a Jaguar. It will never fix its reliability.
It's
Like,
very British. It's not like
duh.
British. It's not
Even
British Leyland unreliable.
the
But
E-Type, my dad, yeah, I have a manual for the E-Type from its launch, and in there it says it may be a good idea to pack a few tools with you just in case, like something like that. You know what I mean?
yeah,
And then
yeah.
it's absolutely ridiculous. Like that's just the nature of Jaguar. But you have to wonder, like, don't startup EV companies kind of have it easier because they don't have to pivot a billion-trillion-dollar company. They just have to take all those government incentives and try to, find new customers. They don't have to convert people. It's on some level, the Rivians of the world have it easier.
In some ways, but really, when it comes to sort of like reliability and build quality and stuff like that, Tesla has done a very good job at convincing its customers that build quality and reliability doesn't matter. In a way, and it drives other automakers crazy because, like,
Yeah.
if you had a Tesla, you were probably okay with a lot of issues. But if that
Yeah.
same person then went over and bought a Hyundai
They'd
and it
be
had those same
furious.
issues, they would
Yes.
be furious.
Absolutely.
But things that are not furious inducing, well, maybe there is a segment on your website that might anger people, but
Oh, many segments. What do you mean,
many,
just one?
many segments. But Amelia, we're going to wrap up this part of the show. So tell all of the fine people, kids, adults, anybody watching, where they can find you.
Motorheadmama.com, YouTube, Motorhead Mama, that's MAMA, IG, Facebook, X, all the places.
Or down the street from Jason Momoa's house.
Or obviously, or at Jason's house.
Or at Jason Momoa's house. I wanna meet him. I don't know why. Can you arrange that?
Absolutely.
Can we go hang out? I'd love to have a beer with Jason Momoa. Like I don't necessarily I wouldn't like fan kid out over him, but I just think it would be really cool to meet Jason Momoa. Like I want to be able to tell people that I have met Jason
We'll work
Momoa.
on that. We'll work on it. He's a friendly dude. He's a very friendly. He's actually
I believe it.
incredibly nice and friendly.
We've already got you one subscriber for coming on here,
Thank
Amelia.
you.
So it was worth your time.
Obviously.
But earlier we talked a little bit about the not Fisker. I keep wanting to say Fisker because I was talking about Fisker earlier. The Lucid Gravity, not the microgravity, not the zero gravity like zero gravity seats in the Nissan, but just Gravity. And Craig, our boy Craig, who is not here, has a first look of the Gravity that you can click on if you're not watching this live. Right over here. And then